I never imagined my life would take the shape it did after becoming Robert's wife. When I stepped into the role of stepmother, I assumed affection would arrive naturally, that persistence alone would be sufficient to span the invisible divide between a woman and a child who did not share her blood. I was mistaken about the simplicity. But I was correct about one essential truth. Love, when it eventually takes hold profoundly. Before I unfold the rest of this night, take a second to hit like and subscribe. It really does help more than you know. And if you're drawn into stories like this, I want you here for every one of them. Also tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Are you in a small town where the evenings fall slow and gentle, or in a city where the lights never quite go dark? My stepson's name was Oliver. He was 14 when I first became part of his world, lanky for his age, reserved in a manner that felt protective rather than introverted. He had lost his mother, Catherine, 4 years before our paths crossed. She had departed following an extended illness, one that claimed her gradually and agonizingly from those who treasured her, though I never had the privilege of knowing her personally. By the time Robert and I exchanged vows, Oliver had already mastered the art of surviving without anticipating much from anyone. From the outset, Oliver preserved his distance. He was respectful, never impolite, but there existed a partition between us that I couldn't determine how to breach. I attempted not to interpret it as personal. I reminded myself that sorrow transforms children. That devotion to a departed parent can feel like disloyalty when someone unfamiliar enters the scene. Our residence was hushed in those initial months. Robert devoted extended hours to his work as a civil engineer. I operated from home as a freelance copywriter. Oliver occupied most of his time in his bedroom, earbuds inserted, immersed in novels or drawing continuously in a tattered sketchbook he transported everywhere. Dinner exchanges were abbreviated. Academic reports were sparse. I convinced myself that presence carried more weight than insistence, so I remained patient. Years elapsed in that fashion. Silently, cautiously, Oliver matured, became more independent. He contributed to household responsibilities without prompting, never grumbled, never created complications. Instructors admired him. Robert beamed with pride. Yet there persisted a gap between Oliver and me that never entirely sealed. I cherished him in my own fashion, but I couldn't discern whether he cherished me in return, or simply endured me. Then Robert departed from this world without warning. It occurred on an unremarkable Thursday afternoon, a sudden stroke, no indication, no final words. One instant I was organizing weekend plans. The next I was positioned in a hospital waiting area that carried the scent of sterility and devastation, absorbing words that refused to register. I recall contemplating Oliver before contemplating myself. How do you convey loss to someone who has already experienced too much of it? The months following Robert's passing were the most challenging I have ever endured. Sorrow emptied the house, converting familiar spaces into reverberations of what once existed. I battled to leave my bed certain mornings. Invoices accumulated. Quiet felt more burdensome than sound ever could. Oliver astonished me during that interval, though I didn't comprehend it right away. He began emerging from his room with greater frequency. He assembled basic dinners when I neglected to nourish myself. He inquired if I required anything when I ventured out for errands. Modest actions. Understated kindnesses. But they carried more significance than elaborate declarations ever could. Nevertheless, I presumed that once he reached 19 he would depart. University, independence. A fresh existence without the association of a stepmother linked to an agonizing period. I readied myself for that reality, assuring myself it was expected. Oliver never suggested otherwise. On my 44th birthday, 4 years following Robert's death, I awakened feeling more burdened than typical. Birthdays had forfeited their pleasure. I intended to disregard the occasion entirely, approach it like any other Thursday. I labored late into the evening reviewing documents, then retired without consulting the date. The following morning, I detected something peculiar. The house carried the fragrance of brewing coffee and warm spices. Oliver was already risen, positioned in the kitchen donning an apron Robert once favored. My heart contracted at the image. On the table rested a modest cake, somewhat lopsided, unmistakably crafted by hand. Beside it lay a folded note. "Happy birthday," Oliver offered quietly, averting his gaze. For a moment, words escaped me. I observed the cake, the dedication behind it, the subtle tremor in his hands as he stood there anticipating my response. "You weren't obligated to do this," I eventually managed, my voice fracturing despite my attempts at composure. "I wished to," he answered. I unsealed the note gradually. Inside, inscribed in deliberate penmanship, were words that suspended my breath. "Thank you for remaining. Thank you for selecting me even when you weren't required to." I recognize I don't express it, but you are important to me. Tears obscured the page. I raised my eyes to him, genuinely observed him, and recognized how substantially he had developed. He was no longer the shielded adolescent I encountered years prior. He was a young man who had discovered how to convey love softly, deliberately. That signifies more to me than you realize, I said. He acknowledged with a nod, still evading my look, but I detected a faint smile forming at the edge of his lips. That day transformed something between us. Following that birthday, Oliver commenced revealing himself in manners I hadn't foreseen. He discussed his aspirations for university, his apprehension about departing home, his concern regarding what would become of me if he relocated. I offered him honesty, that I desired for him to flourish completely, without remorse, without assuming accountability for my contentment. You're not an obligation, I expressed to him one evening. Your family. He remained silent for an extended period afterward. I never understood if I was permitted to consider you that. He replied at last. The words lingered with me long after he withdrew from the room. Months afterward, Oliver requested that I attend his art presentation at school. His mentors had urged him to enter his creations in a district competition. I consented without hesitation, honored beyond expression. The gallery space overflowed with families, educators, and pupils. Canvases and illustrations adorned the walls. Oliver's work distinguished itself immediately, not because it was bold, but because it was genuine. One composition specifically seized my attention. It depicted a woman positioned in an entryway, radiance behind her, arm outstretched, waiting. The inscription read, "The woman who remained." My chest constricted as I grasped its significance. When Oliver approached me, I found myself speechless. I merely held him, extending the embrace longer than customary. "That one represents you," he murmured quietly. "I understand," I breathed. The genuine revelation, however, arrived months afterward, just preceding Oliver's departure for university. I had presumed he would relocate permanently. I conditioned myself emotionally, reminding myself that releasing was integral to loving someone. But one evening, he seated me at the kitchen table. His demeanor was earnest. "I've been accumulating savings," he disclosed. "From employment, grants, everything." I acknowledged with a nod, uncertain of his direction. "I intend to contribute toward the house," he proceeded. "The payments, the maintenance. You've sacrificed enough for me." I declined immediately with a shake of my head. "Oliver, that's not your obligation." "I'm aware," he responded, "but I desire it to be. Not from necessity, from choice." Tears gathered in my eyes once more, as they frequently did in his presence lately. "There's additional news," he continued, reaching into his satchel. He withdrew a small frame and presented it to me. Inside rested a photograph I had never encountered. It was captured years earlier on an ordinary afternoon, taken from a distance. I was seated on the veranda absorbed in a book while Oliver, considerably younger, occupied the steps nearby sketching. "I captured it with my previous phone," he explained. "It marks the initial moment I experienced security again. Following Mom." I clutched the frame against my heart, overcome. "You didn't take her place," he stated, finally holding my gaze. "But you enabled me to breathe once more." That was the instant I comprehended. Love doesn't perpetually proclaim itself boldly. Sometimes it develops quietly through shared stillness, through unvoiced comprehension, through remaining when departing would prove simpler. Oliver's expression wasn't merely the cake, the note, the artwork, or the monetary assistance. It encompassed the years of forbearance, the consideration, the decision to perceive me not as a substitute, but as someone who cherished him unconditionally. 2. When Oliver departed for university, the house felt vacant once more. But not desolate this occasion. It felt replete with recollections, with connection, with a bond that separation could never dissolve. He still telephones every Sunday. He returns for celebrations. He presents me as his mother now, without reluctance. In each instance he does, my heart expands with appreciation for the adolescent who once maintained his distance, and the man who moved me with the most sincere expression of all, permitting me to genuinely belong in his life. Certain connections aren't established through genetics. They're established through decision, through endurance, through appearing when withdrawal would prove easier, and occasionally, just occasionally, the individuals who elect to love us become the ones who matter most profoundly. If this narrative stirred something within you, share it with someone who requires its message. Subscribe and activate notifications, because narratives like this remind us that family isn't invariably about origin. Sometimes it's about who remains. Thank you for joining me here.